Good evening, everyone. 1st of November. Lovely to see you again. We're a little short on the ground and some people are running late, but we'll perhaps have to rejig things in the meantime. But let's start. Apologies.
So we have apologies this evening from Councillors Wells, Welton, Corney and Slade. And we also have an apology from Oliver Morley, who is running late. So we will just, I hope that the panel are in agreement, it just moved, that's supposed to be item 5. So perhaps we will just pause on that and move on to item 6 until he arrives. It's just a traffic issue. And so that way then he can do his item once he's here, if that's okay with everybody. So yeah, I think that's that one.
Thank you. Item 2, or item 1 actually, minutes.
So obviously you have the minutes from the last meeting. Is everybody happy that the chair signs those as a correct record? Any questions, Nathan?
I know it was a long meeting.
Quite long minutes.
We're on item 2. That's responses to questions arising.
So in your agenda there, you will see that you've had the responses to a couple of questions from the last corporate performance report that weren't available for us with the last agenda publication. So hopefully that answers those 2 questions that were raised at the September meeting. And I think they're just for noting, unless anybody has any questions or further detail needed on those. No, fantastic.
Okay.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, Councillor Blackwell.
Great, thank you. It's just to pick up on the 4th point from Councillor Pickering's question on the One Leisure performance. So we have the appointment. Oh, sorry. Okay. Okay, so we have the appointment of a new activities manager. So will he or she be reporting to us on a regular basis?
So I think that activities manager will be reporting into the One Leisure system. I don't believe that's somebody who will be coming to this panel as such. I think they'll be reporting into the head of leisure and health. So that will be there. But obviously, as soon as I find out any more detail on that, I will circulate that to the panel as well.
Great, thank you.
Item 3, members' interests.
Both of mine are on item 9. Declaration of interest as an employee of the NHS, the Joy app, and also as a trustee of Food for Naught, because they're also mentioned.
Thank you, Councillor Howell. No, right, okay. So item 4, overview and scrutiny work programme.
So again, in the newer format that we've had here, has anybody got any questions on the overview and scrutiny work programme as is coming through? I will keep populating the forward agenda items as we get information on what's coming through. There's a couple of gaps in there at the moment for meetings which currently have no items on the agenda, but I would expect them to have items on within the next month or so. So see that may look a little bit light there. So is there any questions on that at all? Councillor Martin.
Not necessarily a question, but going forward, I'd quite like to see a review into, and it might be a work programme into the IT systems within HCC. I'm still waiting for the 3C's annual report. Hopefully, Mr. Morley will be able to update me on that when he's here. But reading the risk management strategy and from last year's 3C's annual report, I think there's a few things that we should dig our teeth into and look at.
So just going back to that, as obviously I think we've already spoken about, and I know you raised a question at council, the 3CT no longer reporting to this panel, that's been taken away. So I've got the detail on that I can give you outside of this meeting. But obviously that's something that we can look potentially at putting onto the work programme. I'll add that as a note, and then I'll investigate how we can maybe progress that as well.
As I've said, we're running a little late. So item 5, what I'll do is defer that. and then we'll come back to that. So can we actually go to item 6, which is the finance performance? Thank you, Sharon.
So I'm delighted to be able to introduce our subject matter expert. Karen is sort of somewhere between the beach and the bar, I think. So on a lovely day, I'm sure we can appreciate Sharon filling us in on where we are with the finance items instead. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that lovely introduction. Good evening, everyone. To start off with, it's actually been quite a dull quarter this quarter. We're predicting a further underspend of £500,000 from where we were at the end of quarter one. This is primarily driven by underspends in operations, particularly around CCTV and green spaces, and bulky waste income is actually up. We've also had additional income relating to interest and reduced ICT costs due to contract renegotiations. The only area where we're seeing significant overspend is in planning and development management, where they're forecasting additional work to get rid of or to reduce the backlog, and that's put their costs up by around £100,000. Conditions have settled down pretty much with none of the surprises that we got this time last year relating to inflation and utility costs. The costs have remained high, but they've not significantly increased any further. Our rates have not dropped, but the cost is slightly lower than what we budgeted for. Decarbonisation works at one leisure site has pushed up our use of electricity and has switched us to that from what was now cheaper gas rates. The recent pay award is going to be funded through the reserve movement. You'll see that on the corporate resources line. There's a contribution of £750,000 into reserves. That will be paying for that additional 1% throughout the term of the MTFS. And it hasn't impacted the quarter two forecast. Staffing costs remain an issue. Several neighbouring authorities are offering higher packages than we're offering, and that is continued to be seen as an ongoing risk. The main quarter one to quarter two movements are, as I say, within ICT and operations. The interest receivable has gone up slightly this quarter. We've been prudent in reforecasting, so we're actually only putting an additional £100,000 in. This is because although the interest rates are high, there are two sorts of deposits we're making. One is to the money market funds and the other is to the debt management office. Money market funds is sort of like a worldwide fund, and that sort of follows our interest rates. The debt management office, it doesn't really follow, and there's no way of predicting with any certainty what interest rates we will be getting to the end of the year. So we've kept that prudently low. Collection rates slightly lower than last year relating to council tax. That's because there's been a shift, so we're getting more to be paid in February and March of next year rather than in April and May of this year. There's a new table within the revenue side which is to do with debt, the general fund debt. I think there was a very small table. We've now actually expanded that to show the type of debt and the level at the end of the year and as it is now. Having had a discussion with Councillor Mickleborough and Councillor Jennings, we have decided that we will change that table slightly to actually put some ageing on it. It doesn't make any sense really just to say, well, we've got £20 million. If all of it is current, it's not really a problem. So that will be coming for the next quarter. Capital forecasting, again, we're continuing to forecast an underspend due to project delays. We've also got a planned budget overspend at Fareham. That work is supposed to be finishing towards the end of this year, the beginning of next year. that overspend will be funded through, we hope, increased income, because we've changed it from one enormous or two big units to several smaller units, which should make it easier to let. We are actively marketing those at the moment. We've had some interest, but there's nothing actually set in stone. No one signed any leases. There's been no additional borrowing. Capital is currently being funded from grants or existing reserves. Commercial investments pretty much the same as they were at Q1. There's no income coming in for Fareham while the works are being undertaken. The team visited the site last week, and I believe the works are continuing well. I haven't heard anything to the contrary. There's still 2 vacant units at the Rowley Centre. Prezzo unit has now been returned to us. Part of their liquidation administration was to surrender the lease, which means we've been able to clear the site. Previously, I think there were things like umbrellas that they actually owned. We couldn't go in there. Now we can. Again, it's one of these sites. It's being actively promoted, but there's little interest at the moment.
Thank you, Sharon. Yes, Councillor Jennings.
Thank you, Chair. Firstly, I'd like to thank Sharon and Karen and Brett or Councillor Mickelberg for the opportunity of speaking to them about the numbers in more detail before the meeting. I think one thing that hasn't been mentioned, and I can speak as a financial professional here, that the ability to turn around this level of detail of accounts within 21 days of quarter end is quite astounding. So I think our thanks should go to Sharon and her team for that. I have a question really for Councillor Mickelberg, actually. The forecast underspend for the year is currently now sitting at 1.2 million. Is it expected that that figure will be added to reserves?
I would hope that we stay at 1.2 million. I think the problem always is when we're only halfway through the year, is that it's too speculative. There's still so much to go. There's still so much that can change. If nothing changes, we have nothing specific in the pipeline that we're thinking of doing with that money. However, if we're still with 1.2 million at the end of Q3, then we would stop and review and consider if there are costs that we can bring forward or other things that we may be able to do with that funding. Yeah.
Is this a supplementary or is that another question? Right. Can I just open? Do anyone else have any other questions there before? Well, actually, I do, if I may, if I just go back to Sharon. It was just clarification on the issue of Fareham. When you mentioned actually about the overspend, can I just clarify, you're talking about the overspend for the refurbishment? Okay, because I think we had about 700,000 or so, wasn't it?
Yes, it is the refurbishment, not revenue cost.
Thank you. Councillor Gardner.
Thank you very much, Chair. It's just a point with regard to Appendix 1, operations. It states in there, reduce works required at watercourses. Now, I know a watercourse that is running through Hinginbrook Park that HDC are the riparian owners of. If that was cleaned, that would help the flooding situation in one of my villages. So if we are not spending the amount of money that we're required, that we've got for clearing watercourses, and we've got some extra money there, I would like to put forward that we spend that clearing Hinginbrook Park watercourse so that we can reduce the levels of flooding in villages like Alconbury, which if you only had to be out there last Friday and today, when Mill Road and everywhere else, the water is across the road and you can't get in. So you've only got one access into Alconbury. So if we have got an opportunity, then I would like to see us do that as a priority, as a good neighbour to our villages and whatever. So that's just me, plugging my village, but I think I'm entitled. Thank you very much.
Did you want to respond or leave it at that? Okay.
I will do that. I do have a meeting with Michelle shortly, so I will be bringing the subject up again there. Yes, we are. So bring your wellies.
Are there any other questions? No.
I think Councillor Jennings had a question.
Councillor Jennings.
Thank you, Chair. It was a question really about how the capital programme, the report is showing. Where it's got a year-to-date actual of nil, for example, in civil parking enforcement, it's got a year-to-date actual of nil spend. Yet sort of reports later in the pack in other items seem to suggest that we've been doing quite a lot on civil parking enforcement already and that the project is at green because stuff has been happening. So stuff surely must have been spent at this point. Where would that be being shown? Does it then get transferred over when the project's complete, or?
Yes, there are two elements of the capital parking enforcement. There's a capital side and there's a revenue side. So at the moment, I would imagine all of the spend is within revenue, possibly to be transferred out.
Are there any other questions? No. Excellent. Well, on that, thank you very much. And we can move on to the next item, which is Treasury Management.
It's a same introduction, really. I'm absolutely delighted that I have the subject matter expert who's most certainly the expert in this subject, who will be able to talk you through the report. And between us, we will answer any questions that you have. Thank you, Oliver.
Thank you very much for that introduction. This is the Treasury Management Report for the first 6 months of the year. So we've seen the strategy before the start of the year, and we'll see the full year report at the end. So this is the report for halfway through. What I just wanted to do quickly is just run through some of the highlights. On the investing side, the rates at March were just under 4%, and they're now just over 5%. So we've seen some increases in interest rates, but not the sort of large increases that we were probably discussing last year. The balance of cash that we've got is similar to what we had at the beginning of the year. The split of it is still money market funds and DMO, with a bit more in the DMO this time in the debt management organisation deposit. On the borrowing side, we haven't done any new borrowing, which was mentioned by Sharon. In fact, we've paid a loan off, which was a small loan that we had to finance a loan that we'd given out to Cambridge Regional College, and also Cambridge Regional College have paid off their loan to us, so that is now clear. And also Hunting and Jim have paid their loan off as well in the last 6 months, so they were both paid off in August. Which leaves us with some maturity loans with an average life of 21 years. So we haven't got any short-term borrowing anymore. And on the loan side, Cambridge Regional College have paid off, Hunting and Jim have paid off, and that just leaves us with a large loan outstanding with Urban and Civic and a smaller one with Somersham. So they're being paid off as planned. And they were the highlights that I wanted to note. Thank you.
Thank you, Oliver. Are there any questions? Councillor Gardner.
On page 142, We state there the main changes to the valuations of the Rowley Centre are for the existing portfolio. The increase in property value at the Rowley is a result of increase in rents. Now, we've just heard that Prezzo are not there any longer. So is that going to make a difference going forward? Because you're not getting that rent then, are we? Perhaps it's me being, it's just, oh, sorry.
That's right. Yeah, the valuations are based on the rents that we're getting in. So we only revalue once every year. So yeah, when we revalue at the end of the year, then there may be an effect on the valuations. But yeah, is that all right? Yeah.
Councillor Martin.
Thanks, Chair. I have a couple of questions. First one, in Table 8, it has the existing portfolio. What is the existing portfolio?
Yeah. The new properties that were purchased, like Rowley Centre, are individually identified. So the existing portfolio is everything that we had pre-CIS. So Leveller's Lane in St Neots. I'm going to try and think of things now, but I can't think of it. But basically, it's everything else. So it's the smaller units, basically, that are based in Huntingdon, St Neots, St Ives. Yeah.
So we as part of the reporting on the portfolio, we plan to break some of those out. It's not some information that you're going to want every single time because there'll be a lot of it. But we were talking with Liz and Karen previously on this, and we think it would be beneficial just to open up what that portfolio is to everybody to have a look and to be able to scrutinise it, but to only do, because it won't change, to only do so maybe on an annual or biannual basis. But we'll look to try to do that in the very near future.
Yeah, thank you for that answer. And it'll be good to know that the details, especially if you are looking to refresh the CIS, as you said in the past. So my second question is about the liquidity of the council. Obviously, at the moment we're quite good with liquidity. Was it 55 million, 54 million? Obviously, I'm a new councillor. How does that figure compare to previous years? So when I became a councillor, we were in the middle of the Ukraine crisis, interest rates going up massively. So how has it changed, and how do you see it changing in the future with the potential increases in the interest rates and the base rates from the Bank of England?
Yeah, I think for the last 2 or 3 years we've had balances similar to what we've got now. During COVID, the balances increased substantially. So, a lot of it's coming from what we're building up with SIL. So we're building up a big reserve with SIL. Money's coming in, but we're not spending it as fast as we're getting it in. So the cash balances are building up. But yeah, if you go back maybe 10 years, we were sort of by the time you got to March, you were down to, because we're not getting any council tax in anymore, we're down to about even. So we didn't really have big cash balances like we have now, maybe during August or September. So yeah, there is a history of lower cash balances certainly, and the last few years they've been a lot higher. But as far as I can see, the last 2 or 3 years have been pretty similar on the cash balances. So for the short term, we're looking probably at holding on to the same amount of cash. It really depends on what happens with, I think SIL is going to be the big thing. If we start spending a lot of money on SIL type projects, which are big, we're going to eat into the cash balances. But I mean, a lot of the stuff that's in the capital program at the moment is stuff that's funded, future high streets. So that doesn't really affect the cash balance. We're getting money in at the same time as it's going out. So, I can't really I'm not really sure what's going to happen, but certainly I think for next year we're still going to be some big cash balances, and possibly the year after. But it's difficult to tell really. Depends again, like I say, on what happens with SIL.
If I may, sorry.
To come in again.
Yep, on you go.
I was just going to say that the cash balances, obviously, they're not ours necessarily to spend. So that the balances there are made up of many different pots, of which we only have a discretion to spend of a small amount of those based to the various funds. So the SIL money we couldn't spend on anything that we wanted to. It's not a discretionary spend pot. just possibly worth clarifying.
Thank you. Actually, my question's on the back of Councillor Morton's. It was about short-term liquidity again. I noticed actually in the report that you'd mentioned the notice period had increased from 3 to 6 months. Do you foresee any major impact on the council?
Is that the property fund? Yeah. I was just looking back at the dates today. We've held those since 2016, 2017. We put some money into the property fund. There's no real intention at the moment to withdraw it, and that is the idea of the fund, for it to be in there the long term. So we get a good revenue stream from that. So I don't think that's going to be a problem, because at the moment we're not expecting to withdraw those funds. It's quite a small amount compared to the overall cash balance. So I can't see that we're going to be in a position where we need to take it out. I mean, I think they've said that they might. I think the expectation was that they would reduce that down again. That was increased because of a particular problem with the property market, and they didn't want people withdrawing their money, and therefore they'd have to start selling properties when it wasn't favourable. So, there's a possibility that might go down again.
Thank you, Oliver. Are there any other questions? No. Well, thank you, gentlemen, for your time on that. Thank you. We can move.
I was going to say Oliver's.
Yes, I was just going to say that. I'd like to go back to the original agenda and go back to item 5, and this is review of the Council's risk management strategy. Good evening, Oliver.
Hello, evening. So thank you, Chair. As you well know, that I'm a big fan of risk management, so I'm pleased to be able to bring forward the update to the previous strategy, which you've had time to scrutiny. This is just to give you some context. This is following a LGA peer review, which we initiated earlier in the year, and much of the review work and actions from that have been incorporated into the risk strategy. I would say that when you look through the papers, there's a reference to the Orange Book, and this helps councils to structure and control their risk management in the public sector, and the emphasis being that the financial officer takes, so in this case it is Karen Sutton, our section 151 officer, has a lot of accountability in that area. Unfortunately, Karen can't be with us today because she's taking a well-earned holiday, so I have Oliver with me to help me to present the strategy. But I would say that it has been to the corporate governance committee, and they have reviewed the strategy. They didn't actually make any real significant comments about the strategy. Most of their comments were on the maturity of the risk inventory. But I'll pause there and just hand over to Oliver for his comments.
Good evening, members, and thank you for your indulgence on the movement of this item on the agenda, which comes ironically after an unmitigated risk around traffic in Cambridge. So just to add to the comments of Councillor Hassel, members are very much today invited to comment on, for us, what is an absolute crucial document in terms of our internal governance and how we mitigate some of the key challenges that we face as an organisation. You don't need me to tell you that risk has increased in profile in relation to local government over a period of time, and it is very much something that is making sort of front page news as we speak at the moment. To reiterate the points that Councillor Hassel has made, the report in front of you today comes following a significant period of review of the previous document, which was authored in 2017 2017, and the update absolutely builds upon detailed review of the government's Orange Book, which outlines appropriate sort of governance arrangements and best practice in terms of risk management within the public sector. And the risk strategies of neighbouring authorities to try and make sure we're learning from others and establishing around sort of common baselines. And again, as Councillor Hassel said, the output of that LGA peer review we had of our audit function and the very clear guidance they had of making sure we've got that very, very strong line for our risk management through to our second and third line defences and audit direction within that. And I think just a couple of other points I wanted to make is clearly risk management is not a static function. It is a very dynamic function. And I would expect this to be the starting point for this document rather than the end point. And it will evolve and shift over time on the basis of feedback from corporate governance and others. And indeed, you have already seen some of the aspects of the risk strategy that are presented here layering into the way we do business already. So the quarterly reporting that will be on the agenda later includes risk tolerances around performance levels, for instance, absolutely building on the work that sits within this risk strategy itself. The major changes from the 2017 document, which I thought people might find useful just to draw your attention to, is simplified risk categories. So traditionally we had 13 risk categories that at times were overly complex and managers struggled to differentiate between legal risk, contractual risk, policy risk, for instance. So looking to create a more meaningful and sensible area there that is meant to be sort of functional. Clarified risk appetite statements as well. We had in the past a large number of different categorization of risk appetite, which was overly complex, and simplified processes for risk management as well. And again, all of which you can see in the document. The document lays out very, very clearly what we will do, who will do it, what you can expect to see as members, and critically, clear roles and responsibilities. But ultimately, as I've heard so many times from members, the strategy is great, but what's going to happen on the back of it, I think, is the critical thing. So subject to the adoption of the strategy, there'll be the fundamental review of the risk register. That work is already underway of aligning those to the risk categories that are included in the document. And there is some work required around the sort of standardization of the sort of terms and how those risks are laid out, which is underway as well, and to provide some sort of targeted support and training to the management cohort as a whole to make sure this is very robustly embedded across the organisation as a whole. Before I welcome your sort of input and reflections and challenge on this document, I just did want to note the significant contribution that Paula Snapkowskaiter has made as our risk officer to the development of this document. A bit of an unsung star within Karen Sutton's area, but I didn't want this to be presented today without her getting the appropriate recognition that she deserves on the back of it. So very much welcomes our feedback and challenge. And as I say, this is an opportunity to make sure it absolutely reflects all the sort of challenges and concerns that you may have.
Open the floor. Councillor Jennings.
Thank you, Chair. I think I was having a look down the responsibilities of various panels and bodies in the document, and of course, it references the Corporate Governance Committee, of which there are several members sitting around this table. And I was trying to find out what was the role of this scrutiny panel, and I guess it's to look at what the Cabinet's responsibilities are and to challenge those. So my question really is, the second of those Cabinet's responsibilities is to determine the Council's risk appetite annually. And what I'd like to know is, has there been any change in the risk appetite of the Cabinet?
So there has been a change in the risk appetite. So within the previous risk strategy, there were various risk appetites in relation to different aspects of corporate responsibility. So there was a risk appetite around finance, there was a risk appetite around transformation, and a number of other categories. I can't remember all of the specifics. I think one of the key challenges that came out of the review of the strategy is define the point at which that appetite is exceeded within a given situation. And I think there was times at which that was challenging, particularly for cross-cutting functions like transformation. And so the major change is to move away from that more segmented approach, where it's very difficult to draw a very clear line and say where that responsibility is, to this more cross-cutting approach, which is whenever it sits outside that defined tolerance in the 5x5 table of risk, that would be the point at which the appetite is exceeded. I could share a copy of the original risk strategy if that'd be useful to illustrate that point.
That'd be really helpful because I couldn't find it online. So
Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, Chair. Can I please get a reminder of who sits on the Assurance Board and how often it meets, please?
The Assurance Board is effectively it's a senior leadership team committee. So it's chaired by Karen Sutton as the Section 151 officer. Also on the Assurance Board is Liz Smith, as our Chief Delivery Officer, who oversees our project management function and therefore project management risk. Deborah Moss, as our internal auditor, sits on the committee. There are others as well, but they're the three kind of key critical members of staff who've got the kind of key accountabilities around risk management and making sure there's good oversight of issues. So I can circulate a full membership list if that would be helpful for you, Councillor Harvey.
Councillor Morton.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to find out how the risk register links in with the reports that we receive. In particular, one that stood out for me is risk reference 40, so of the local plan reconfiguration, and it says that there's a high risk of the government intervening to write the local plan and High Court taking over. And these risks weren't mentioned in the report when we were discussing the local plan update. So I'd just like to find out how the risk register, links in with the reports that we're getting that state the risks to any decision that we make.
Okay. So any report being presented to you as members should lay out the risks inherent in the decisions that are being presented to you. So you've asked about the local plan. You know, local plan documents would include a series of risks within it. An example that we've spent a lot of time talking about recently would be the garden waste subscription service, where again the risks and challenges within it are laid out. Now, in normal circumstances, I would expect the overlap between those risks and what's in the risk register to be very close. To be a very close link between the two. I think there are a couple of instances in which that might not be the case, Councillor Martin. So one would be the difference between potentially a sort of project risk and an operational risk. So if it's something that relates to a specific project, but actually there's a risk that relates to the team, for instance, might be one example. I think in this case, it might be that it is a dated risk, which relates to that is a number of years old and needs a substantial review. And that's where, in the final points of my sort of comment, subject to the adoption of this, that fundamental review and refresh of all the risks within the risk strategy is currently being undertaken. And I just had time today with our internal audit officer, Deborah Moss, and with Paula, who I mentioned earlier, to review that process. So I would expect over time that harmonisation to be much closer.
Are there any other? Oh, so
I just wanted to add to that because I think Councillor Martin makes a really good point there, and I think that there needs to be a stronger linkage between the risk inventory or the risk register and reports that we get. So I'm hoping that in the fullness of time we'll have not just the description of the risks associated with the project, but the risks that it relates to. So you can actually go back to the risk register and then see the mitigating actions that are being taken.
I think that makes a lot of sense actually, and I totally, I would support that. Are there any other comments? Because I've actually got a comment myself. I'd like to actually. I mean, I read it and I think it's excellent because obviously, all of us that are experienced in business recognise the whole issue of risk, and you need to do the risk. I was a little concerned about ownership of risks. Certainly from my own experience, I would expect a risk owner to be a senior manager, not necessarily just operational manager, because they don't have the skills or the clout, frankly, to actually address the senior risks that are there. Is that something that you're actually taking into account?
So I think you make a very good point. Clearly, within risk, Councillor Gledo, there'll be some of those that are absolutely strategic level risks, which affect the entire operation of the council, potentially external factors that we're looking to sort of mitigate or respond to. Those risks would absolutely be held at the highest level within the organisation, with very clear ownership at director, AD, or head of service level. However, in terms of risk management, we need to be clear that the risk needs to be owned at the level of which the person is accountable and has the ability to make things, to make things happen. And within that instance, there will be times in which some of those risks do sit at team leader or service manager level, because that's the appropriate level. But the critical point for you is all of that ownership is reviewed by senior leadership team, the corporate leadership team, to make sure that we are content, and ultimately accountability sits with us to make sure that it is held at the right level.
Yeah, just to add to Oliver's point, and yeah, Oliver's absolutely spot on. But I think one of the feedbacks from just reviewing the corporate governance committee's feedback is that I think one of the feedback was just too many risks for them to sort of get their head round, and I think what I think will happen as the risks are analysed is that they will become, if you like, bigger risks. So the situation that we're talking about, where you have an individual sort of team leader who's responsible for a risk, I think probably what you're going to find is that the responsibility goes up the chain because the risk is actually bigger. So we'll end up with higher materiality, but with a smaller number of risks, with team leaders perhaps being responsible for individual mitigating actions.
Just a follow up point on what Councillor Hassel said there, because I think that is a key point that I didn't draw out in my presentation, so apologies. Is one of the changes from the previous risk strategy was we had a corporate risk register and a service risk register, and only the corporate risk register was presented to corporate governance. That was how traditionally that happened. What this risk strategy has proposed is an integrated risk register that covers everything. And I think at the moment, what that has meant is people have seen absolutely everything, but that refinement process will see actually it will be on the basis of, the impact, the likely impact and significance of the risk. We'll see a much reduced list. But I think visibility has been the key point we've aimed for, and complete transparency in terms of the entire risk inventory.
Thank you, Chair. Just wanted to talk about risk reference 338, which is 3C legal capacity. It's currently the inherent risk is very high and the residual risk is very high because 3C's legal doesn't have the staff in place with the skills to progress parking charges through the magistrates court. Could you give us an update on where we're up to with that and what the action plan is to sort that?
I can. So I would suggest that probably the discussion of the detailed risk, perhaps this isn't the best forum to do it, but I will give an update on this on this specific. If there are others like this, I'm more than happy to take them offline and respond accordingly. So the first thing I would say is I think those two risk categorizations are probably excessive. Would be my instant response. It is, it's been a matter of sort of public record, and I've been here on a number of occasions to update that recruitment into the legal profession in local government, it remains a challenge. The rates of pay we offer, the heat in the market, and other factors make recruitment a challenge. On the whole, 3C Legal have done a very good job of balancing that and making sure that we do have the appropriate level of resource in place. And where we can't recruit someone permanently, that we access locums and other people to pick that up. And in relation to parking, there has been a specific challenge. That's been an area that we have struggled with at some points. What we have done in those areas, though, is looked at using outside providers to help solve that issue. So I think there is some mitigation in place, but I can come back and give you a more detailed briefing in your role as shadow portfolio holder for shared services to give you an update on that specific area, Councillor Martin.
Are there any other questions? Just to finalise, I think it's a really good starting position actually as to where we go. I think it needs obviously a little tweaking, and as you quite rightly say, it's an iterative process. So good moving forward is the base. Thank you for that.
Yeah, just very quickly, just say thanks to all the officers. And, yeah, Paola, Karen, I know Oliver has been very close to this one as well. So thank you. Thanks, committee.
No, we're back again. We're actually on item 9. Is it? 8. Performance management. No, we've done performance management framework. Performance management framework. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. We're here to present the new performance management framework document, which I think is a nice bit of work. None of it is particularly groundbreaking, but I wish I'd had this document when I was elected as a councillor, because having read it, I understand how the whole process works much better. In part of the preamble, it says, performance management is about monitoring progress and using data as evidence to drive change and to inform the actions we take to improve outcomes for our residents, which is critically what this is all about. I sit on and have sat on a number of councils and been witnessed and been part of some pretty bad decisions which were taken without considering all the data. And I think that this council, mainly because of the overview and scrutiny process, has an excellent record of looking at data, challenging data and challenging assumptions. So I think this document does a great job of setting out how we challenge our decisions and how we use data. And I pass it on to you for comments. Dan, or do you want to say anything?
Okay, thank you. Oh yes, sorry. So I'm Emma Charter, I'm performance and data analyst, and I helped to write the framework. So the framework included in the agenda papers sets out the principles on how the council will manage, report and scrutinise performance. The last framework was updated in 2017. So not only was it due for a refresh, but we thought the timings aligned well with the corporate plan and the new approach to monitoring, managing and reporting our performance with greater focus on delivery of our outcomes. The framework's been informed not only by the previous version, but also by reviewing other published frameworks from local government, from local authorities. And there's guidance laid out in the Local Government Association Performance Management Guide for local authority officers, and that also helped to shape the framework. The document highlights our regard to best value duty. So I'll just explain a little bit about what that is to give some context. So apologies if I just read this bit. Best value duty was adopted in England and Wales by the Local Government Act 1999 and came into force in April 2000. The aim was to improve local services in terms of both cost and quality, introducing a general duty requiring best value authorities such as district councils to make arrangements to secure continuous improvement in the way in which its functions are exercised, having regard to a combination of economy, efficiency and effectiveness. In deciding how to fulfil the duty, an authority must have regard to any guidance issued by the Secretary of State. Current guidance is focused on procurement and commissioning, severance payments to employees, and access agreements for digital communications network infrastructure. As noted in the framework, a consultation by the Department for Levelling Up, Housing and Communities ran in July and August 2023, and that sought views on statutory guidance for local authorities on that best value duty. The proposed new guidance provides greater clarity to the local government sector on how to fulfil the best value duty by describing what constitutes as best value, the standards expected by the department and the models of intervention that could be used in the event of failure to uphold those standards. Where possible, we have reflected the expectations set out in the consultation in this revised framework, but the DLUHC are still currently analysing that feedback received, so it hasn't actually yet been published. More information and further details about best value duty and the recent consultation can be found by clicking on the links within the document. Future reviews of the framework will be done regularly, and that will reflect changes that impact the way performance is managed, reported and scrutinised, such as the amendments made to best value duty as a result of the recent consultation. We've taken a collaborative approach to developing the framework, gaining positive feedback from the senior leadership team and the assurance board, and made changes to the document based on that comment and feedback. The framework itself not only demonstrates that we're taking action to improve performance management, but the principles will also act as a really useful tool for the council. And that's because the main impacts of the frameworks are that everyone in the council will be clear about how performance is managed. Everyone will understand the value of effective performance management. Everyone will see how that value can be gained from different levels across the organisation. And in turn, that will help highlight our responsibilities that we all have in managing performance. So that's all I have, but I'd welcome any feedback, comments or questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Emma. Any questions from members? No. No questions. Oh.
I just wanted to draw members' attention to one of the recommendations in the report to Cabinet, which is to authorise the Chief Executive to set out a timetable for a corporate or finance peer challenge and to make arrangements for that to take place. That's included. It's not something we're required to do under any particular timescale now, but looking at the guidance that's been proposed, we're recommending that be looked at now because they're probably going to introduce a requirement to do that every 5 years.
Thank you. No. So thank you for the presentation and the documents. Thank you.
So I think we have the same three for the next item as well.
Right. So it's corporate. Item 9, corporate performance report.
So thank you. It gives us great pleasure to present the latest quarterly corporate performance report. I'm not going to spend too long in my preamble because I'm sure you've all read the document. I will note that thanks to Dan and his team, we've had further improvements to the format, and I found myself this time spending less time trying to understand the data and more time interpreting it as well and drawing conclusions from it as well. And so there's the indicators are all really interesting. I think lots of the explanations are great and the preambles are kind of improved as well. And I think we welcome your scrutiny and discussion on any of the points.
The floor is open. Oh, any comments? Councillor Jennings. Oh, sorry. Yes. Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, Chair. Let me just grab my notes. Just around a couple of the DFG KPIs, please, particular PI3 and PI4. Firstly, on PI3, is reducing the forecast number of completions the right move? I'm just wondering if it would not be better to push for more completions and that reducing the target might actually give less incentive to complete. And then for PI4, I actually have some casework that shows a wait of many months, which is far longer actually than shown on the graph. And it's unacceptable because everyone should be safe in their own homes and feel safe. So I'm wondering if I can urge officers to really push to reduce this waiting period. I understand that the delays caused by Places for People are part of this problem, but I'm hearing of delays that are not related to Places for People as well.
Thank you, Chair. Excellent questions. So with regard to PL3, what we're doing is we're reducing the forecast. We're not reducing the target. And what that is an admission that we're not going to make the target this year because of the problems that we've previously identified and that you mentioned in full council and we've talked about previously about the issues we had earlier with Places for People, which is a situation that I hopefully managed to resolve with the help of senior leadership, and we have much better dialogue with them. But unfortunately, those delays at the start of the year are going to reduce the number of projects completed
by the end of the year. Now, it's easy to say that, isn't it? It's easy to look at a graph and say we're going to do less than we said, but we need, like you say, we need to remember that every single one of those delayed cases is a family or a person in a home, who probably can't, live appropriately without adaptation. So it's important to step back sometimes, step back from the pretty graphs and realise there's some real issues underneath this. In terms of PL4, the average time in weeks, again, I'll give you the easy explanation, is that district council aren't the only people involved with this. As you know from your casework, which I've been involved with as well, we have the OTs have to be involved. There's a shortage from county council with occupational therapists. CHIA have got high workload. We have to appoint contractors. We have to work with landlords. We have the issues with places for people. We have to work with residents themselves. And quite often the issue is that each grant is £30,000 for adaptations maximum. 15% of that goes to the Home Improvement Agency. Some more comes off of VAT. And often it's not a massive amount of money to do significant work. And so, often residents have to fundraise outside or use their own resources to improve the property. So there's lots of potential delays. But, having been inside your casework, and I think there's a couple of cases you're dealing with, and Councillor Sanderson has also put one on my plate as well. I think we really have to be mindful about the actual struggle that at the other end of this is that what residents face by these delays, not all of which are down to us, or mostly not down to us, I would say, but it's a real issue, and I think it's something we really need to look at in more detail as well. So I've written to Claudia Deeth, who runs the communities team, to talk about this as well. And I'm going to try and have some high level interventions on those cases specifically, but make sure we're doing the right thing at ground level. I would say if you look at the Cambridgeshire Home Improvement Agency report, which is a shared service between us, Cambridge City Council and South Cambs District Council. If you look at the number of completions, the Huntingdonshire ones are massively outweigh anything done by the combination of the City Council and South Cambs District Council, both of which, if you add them together, are much bigger than us. So in terms of kind of that performance, we are processing more of this work. We're taking the lion's share of CHI resources sometimes as well, but I fully appreciate it, and I agree with you that we need to think about the people at the bottom of that, which is part of our corporate priorities and what we've promised to do.
Any other questions?
Go again. Thank you. Oliver's just reminded me that actually we do have the RSLs for the Registered Social Landlord Forum next week. So again, this is an opportunity to pick up that. Oliver and I are also due to meet senior team at Places for People as well. We're using my appointment as an opportunity to meet the senior leadership team there and raise some of those issues around delays. And there will also be a survey going out from Oliver to all members in readiness for the housing registered social housing providers forum next week. So any of those issues that you've raised, but also that Stephen's flagged as well, is an opportunity to get on the table. So we've got the data to be able to actually use when we have those discussions. So thank you, and thank you, Oliver.
Councillor Jennings.
Thank you, Chair. I can see that for the performance indicators in Appendix B, it's quite clear when they're either red, amber, or green, because we have the values in there that drive the RAG rating. In Appendix C, which is the projects, effectively, the RAG ratings seem to be very subjective, and I'd just be interested to know how those RAG ratings are come up with, and what sort of challenges their internal challenge against those ratings when they come up with. Because clearly, as an external user, I'm going to be drawn to all the non-G, all the non-green ones. But if I look particularly, say, at the Riverside Park St Neots, that's down as a green. But we know that that's been delayed, and it's not yet been delivered, and the project's been delayed, by several years. The civil parking enforcement's down as a green. We haven't got anywhere. The project hasn't started yet. There are rumours that other councils in the county may be dragging their heels on this. So it feels as a reader of these things that I could have just skimmed over the fact that they're both down as green, whereas to me they've got perhaps some still risk in there.
Thank you, Chair. So the projects are managed through our major change board, so that's led by our Chief Delivery Officer, Liz Smith. We have project plans, so that they're assessing how projects are performing in terms of the budget, what's being delivered, and the timescales. But they also deal with change requests. So if there's an issue that arises, a request may be submitted to change the scheduled due date to later for some reason. That does affect the status that they then report to us here. I don't have further details on that to add, as I'm not a member of that board, but you can be assured that there is a board. I'm sure it has considerable senior leadership team membership as well that attends and reviews all of the requests that come through and the project statuses that are being proposed.
I just needed to add as well that I have been informed today that the civil parking enforcement strategy will be coming through ONS, but the Environment Communities and Partnership ONS, hopefully in the new year. So there is something moving on that. Just reassure you on that one.
So just in answer to that, I mean, I agree. Having been through it, it's tempting to look for all the pretty graphs, isn't it? Where you can see clearly, because we put a lot of effort into setting those measures. Dan and his team have put a lot of effort into producing the data, but then you get to Appendix C and it's all subjective. And lots of it, we could argue some might be amber and green. I guess an appropriate way for this to go forward would be for this committee to argue the case for some that you think should be amber, and we should put that forward in the comments and discuss it at cabinet as well, because I think, as you said, some of them, we want to get away from subjectivity in general. It's difficult when there's no numerical methods, or no numerical targets. But yeah, I do agree that we should be able to do a bit of horse trading and get some of those down to amber if they're not appropriate, because that's the point of the report, isn't it? We're not saying, we don't want to paint a picture where everything's green. We want to point out where things are not performing completely as expected. And so I agree with you, Councillor Jennings.
As do I. Councillor Blackwell.
Thank you, Chair. My points are concerning PL 25 and 26. Just a little bit concerned, really, on the staff sickness days, because the workforce information report presented to us at the September Employment Committee, albeit did show a slight decrease to 7.9 days lost per FTE, down from 8.3. So we're now showing a latest year-end forecast increase to 8. I recall a previous target of 6, so that correlates to a green. So I'm not overly comfortable with that. I'm surprised that as we're referring to internal reports that we're confident to assess that as a green.
So 8 days is the target that was been set for this measure corporately, and that was part of the review that we reported to you in June, proposing that target with an intervention level of 10 days. Having produced the workforce report myself for many years, 8 is a fairly good figure for Huntingdonshire District Council. We've had figures well over 10 days in the past. I think what we've had in the last few years has been exceptionally low, and I think that there is more detail in the Employment Committee report. I believe some members of this panel are on that group, so I wonder if that's the place to ask further questions about where we are and how that compares to the past. But from my experience, 8 days is a reasonable target.
Thank you very much, Chair. If I can also add, there is some work going on in the background there, picking up some of the points that were raised at Employment Committee. We're also seeking to differentiate out long periods of long-term sickness, which can distort, for obvious reasons, the actual average. But also, there is another piece of work in terms of how we're continually seeking to improve the performance framework, of looking about where trends might be in terms of that sickness as well, so we can understand where there might be service areas or indeed a trend around what is a cause for ill health, so that we can reflect as an organisation to see if we need to be more proactive around mitigating and preventing that ill health before it actually arises, particularly when we see some of our statistics around mental health and well-being. So there is further work being done that is being done in the background that will then be able to impact on those figures in year before we get to year end, but give us the intel as an organisation then to be able to work with that more effectively.
Sorry. Okay. Thank you, Michelle. Thank you, Chair. Okay. Well, granted, I will just record my disapproval of the rating. I'm sorry, and I'm sorry. 10 days per FTE. It's almost just off the scale. Sorry. Moving on to PL26, the staff turnover. So again, that has been assessed as green. When again we reported at Employment Committee that 1 in 6.7 employees left the council during the last year. So again, I'll challenge that as a green.
Okay, so with these performance indicators, as you said, we've gone through a process where we've agreed what the targets are going to be. Happy at some stage to adjust those targets, but at the moment, the greens were defined. You know, what is red, what is amber, and what's green was defined explicitly at the last meeting. It's not for me to talk about what good performance is outside of that, I think, in this meeting. But I will say the part of the value of this process and this report is under PL25, as you've correctly raised. I looked at those figures. I'm not particularly personally concerned about a raise from 8.2 days from 8 days. But I am concerned when I read, or potentially concerned when I read, that there's been an increase in higher than expected numbers of long-term sick people under long-term sickness. So as a consequence of that, I sent a message to Councillor Hassel, who told me he'd also note the same thing and raised it, and we'll raise it with the Employment Committee. We're not alone in terms, it's kind of part of a national trend that there's been higher than expected numbers of long-term people in long-term sickness. It might be nothing, but it's what sort of thing that we should be flagging now and keeping our eye on as well. So that's going to be raised at the Employment Committee, which I think is the most appropriate place to discuss it.
Thank you. Councillor Martin.
Thank you very much, Chair. Again, yeah, I always said in the past, this format is so much better than the old format. I think there's still some way to go, and I'm the kind of person where I'd prefer more data, but I understand that I'm different from other people, so it's finding a balance, definitely. The one thing that I would like to raise, I know that I raise it when you set these targets, is that some of the targets do seem quite low, and I'd like us to be a bit more ambitious in the future. I look at PI 18, talking about percentage of sampled areas that are judged as clean. Just raising the bar to 95%, over 90%. Let's push it. I'd rather you came to us and said, we've got a red, but we're doing this work, and we do, the team are working really, really hard. We've pushed them to the limit. This is the limit. I'd much rather you come to us and with that than say, oh yeah, it's green, it's fantastic, when actually there might be improvements there compared to last year. And the big one that stands out for me is with planning. I'm just trying to find now PI 12. If you look at the September number, it is lower than any point last year, but it's still judged as a green. And surely we should be trying to push to do better than last year. We should be pushing to do better. So I understand the targets have been set and these are fixed for this year, but looking further afield, I'd much rather us have ambitious targets, and Councillor Ferguson, you come to us in a meeting and say, it is a red, but we have been doing this work and we're doing really well. The team's getting there. It's just going to take another couple of months to reach that really ambitious target.
I'll go first, Dan. So I agree on lots of that. So first of all, I agree with you. I'd like to see more data. I'd like to see some more statistical distributions, some more standard deviations. But I think you and I are a bit weird like that, Councillor Martin. I'm not sure everybody else would appreciate it. But I think more data is. Oh, Councillor Jennings is nodding as well. He's a bit weird too. So I completely agree. I also agree. It's lots of these targets are new targets. I think we set them because we didn't have the history. It was always difficult, without having that data history to set a target, whether it was always a bit arbitrary. I think the targets are a lot clearer now. And then next year, when we set some new targets, I think absolutely, I would prefer to be presenting this. No, I wouldn't prefer to have more reds and ambers and reds, but it's more interesting, is it? Because I think there is still a lot of green, and we want to go from measuring performance to kind of challenging performance a bit more. But you have to set an appropriate level, and having the data will let us set an appropriate level to start to stretch people. I think this year is a bit of a learning exercise. With regard to the street scene question, I agree. I think pushing that higher would be good. With regard to the planning question, which was PL12, I looked at that quite a lot because you can see, the indicator is still green, but the graph is still in a steep decline, apparently. But then, this is where more data is perhaps more helpful, because you read the preamble, there's 20 cases, 3 cases go down. Small variations in a relatively small number of cases can cause those kind of things as well, which is kind of reassuring. But once again, it's an indicator that things are starting to drop. I messaged Councillor Sanderson today to express my concern as well. And I think, you just need to keep an eye on these things as well. So I think what I'm saying is I agree with you on all those topics.
Thanks, Dan.
Thank you. Just to add that the targets for the planning services, when we set those, we obviously did take into account historic performance, but we also took into account the fact that there was a backlog. We've added the indicator around that, and that effort is being put into there that might impact on performance on the other indicators. So I would probably expect to see a higher target next year.
Actually, Councillor Howell.
Okay, yes. Yeah, mine was regarding Action 21 about continuing to champion We Are Huntingdonshire as a source of information for residents, or to deliver services for residents. It's showing as a green. If you actually go on that website, it is just a referral form at the moment. I'm just wondering why it is green.
My understanding with that one is that we weren't necessarily intending to have completed that work to set it up to work as a source of information for everyone at this stage. So we still have time to complete it by the year end.
So having looked at the website today, Councillor Howell, I agree. It's a referral form, and it perhaps some of the layout of the page is rather confusing because it's not obvious necessarily that that's what it looks more like a search engine when you go to the page as well. So some more work kind of reformatting those pages and perhaps adding other resources, which I'm sure you, in your professional and your personal capacity, will help us add those resources as well, because I think it has the potential to be a lot more than it currently is.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, as the comment at the end about the impact as a result of the action about the Joy social prescribing tool. I actually work for How Are You Huntingdonshire, which feeds into the Joy app. We put a lot of our information on there. It goes via an API. So yeah, we would love to be involved in that.
Councillor Gardner.
Thank you very much, Chair. Just with regard to PI9, we can see there that the number of households in temporary accommodation has fallen from 133 to 119. Can you tell me what type of temporary accommodation those households are in? Are the majority at Crown Gardens in Alconbury, or are they in hotel accommodation, or what? It'd just be interesting to know those sort of facts. If you don't know at this stage, then you can always come back. I'm quite happy to take it back later. Thank you, Chair.
So I don't know the exact details. I have a monthly briefing with John Collin, who's in charge of this service, and I'll certainly get him to answer for you. In terms of when I was looking through this, again, being sometimes fooled by all the greens, there are more people in temporary accommodation this year than last year, which is, a concerning trend. Might just be normal variance, but it might be indicative of other problems. So I look at that status, and it makes me nervous, particularly because of the recent announcements of what the government is going to do at the Dolphin Hotel in St Ives, which is and I think we're predicting that perhaps, lots of people are going to end up in temporary accommodation who were previously housed in St Ives. Lots of asylum seekers will end up in temporary accommodation in Huntingdonshire, which has a massive cost to the district council because district council isn't reimbursed by the government at a commercial rate, and so it's going to increase our costs. There's not a massive surplus of temporary accommodation in the area, so it's going to push some of our regular residents out, perhaps as well. It's going to make competing for social housing more difficult as well. So there are concerns. So I think we're looking at these numbers and they're really good, but there are massive concerns about that. So I think that's definitely something that we should be asking. I will ask John to write a report for you, and we can discuss it, personally or perhaps at the next meeting.
Councillor Blackwell.
Thank you, Chair. I endorse quite a few of Councillor Martin's comments because a sort of a brief summary of this report is that there's probably only about 5 areas that are not assessed as green. So first question is, who actually signs off the greens? Thank you.
Apologies. All of the targets and intervention levels have been set for each indicator. Those numbers are used to, and some of them are set for the whole year as a flat rate. Some of them differ month by month. Some are sort of increasing numbers we're trying to achieve. So you'd see a higher number every month. And we use those values to assess the latest performance against. So if you've got a green which is above the red, then we're aiming to have a higher result. And if the figure that's reported is above that, it's green. If it's between the lines, it's amber. If it's below the red line, it's red. And it switches around if it's an indicator we're trying to reduce, to minimise. In terms of the forecasts, those are from the service. They're what they expect to achieve by the year end. That number again is assessed against what the target and intervention levels are, so it's strictly based on what the numbers are. It's as Councillor Jennings said, this has less subjectivity than the actions and projects would on that basis.
Thank you. I appreciate that, but just in summary, this paints the council in quite a green majority when the evidence doesn't match that in several areas. So I think we maybe have to review our reporting, to give a true picture. I'm sorry, I'm not comfortable with this. If we pulled out all the greens, the few ambers, and I don't even know if there was one red. We appears to be distorting some of the actual figures here. We've both around the table. We've found quite a few flaws on this evening, and as I say, I think a considerable amount of those greens need to be reassessed, and we need to see more challenge. Thank you.
So I'll just repeat my previous answer. We just looked through the performance strategy document, framework document, which explicitly says how we came to these conclusions. Councillor Michelberg, Councillor Hassel, and myself sat with SLT officers for a whole afternoon, and we went through and we set the targets, and then we put those targets in front of this committee, who approved them, which is how we set the targets. It's difficult, isn't it? It's always difficult that we can set targets which are going to stretch and challenge people, but also you don't want to set unattainable targets. This is the first year that we've had this format, a first year when all of these have had targets. Previously, many of them didn't. Some of them are going to be learning, some of them are going to adjust, and having achieved a level of performance this year, when we look to set them next year, hopefully, for some of them, we can increase that performance target, as we mentioned previously, to try and drive improvement. But it's silly setting targets when you don't have all the data to stretch people, because in the end, that just becomes demotivating if you can't meet your challenges, and then it's an obvious criticism. So yeah, I agree. I'm not that I'm happy to see ambers and reds, but it shows the system is working. I think that we could dispute some of them, some of these things. I think Councillor Jennings mentioned some of the Appendix C ones are up for debate, but any of the Appendix B one are targets that we set as a committee, and agreed on. And so I'm not sure that there's much scope for changing those in year, but happy to change them at the end of the year when we've got a complete data set. Thank you, Chair.
I think if I may actually comment on that, I think what we have here is targets that were set and need just a review as part of the normal iterative process. And I think that obviously they've been set for this year. Moving forward into next year, I think there are actually some learnings. I think Councillor Martin's made some good points about, obviously saying this is the improvement. And I think all this has done is actually identify that maybe we just need to be a little more challenging and a bit more robust in our identification of the RAG status moving forward. On that, Dan, did you want to come in?
Thank you. I just wanted to add that I haven't double checked the figures, but I believe in the majority of cases the performance is better than last year. So in that respect, yes, we have targets to meet. Some of those targets are lower than we achieved at the end of last year, but there are maybe reasons for that, such as planning, where the issue of dealing with the backlog means that perhaps they weren't as comfortable setting a higher target as they normally would. But yeah, I think better performance than last year doesn't tell me that we're failing in most of those.
Oh, sorry, Michelle.
Thank you, Chair. I think if I can just follow on from Councillor Ferguson's point, we do, in terms of that first year of the new system, it is important that we maintain the targets that we set in year. I think what is interesting is listening to you as members, because we can take that way as officers and we reflect on that as part of that stretch targets for next year. So it would be, and I agree with Councillor Ferguson, in order to change targets in year doesn't give us the full annual picture of what performance might look like. And some of our targets do fluctuate during the year, but ultimately will end up on target within that 12-month period. So I reiterate what Councillor Ferguson has said, in that we maintain what we've got in terms of targets this year, but absolutely listen to what members are saying around, are we pushing ourselves enough? Are we creating the stretch? But I think the other point that Councillor Ferguson makes is around that stretch. If we stretch too much, then suddenly we have a range of reds, which we can never achieve an amber or green, because we've just not factored in the impact on resources or third party. And DFGs is a really good one in terms of third party. So I think continue to listen each quarter as we bring these reports back, but absolutely take that as an assurance as officers. We are reflecting on that in our discussions as we look at how we set. And we're in service planning mode for next year already, so some of these will be coming out in that service planning and refreshing of corporate plan function as well. Thank you, Chair.
Are there any other questions? Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. Mine is just to do with the layout of the report, and I don't know whether anybody else would feel the same way. In that Appendix A and Appendix B, if that information was in each of the outcomes, so you don't have to keep scrolling up and down to get to the appendix to look at what the information you want and then going back up again. If it was all in the same section, that would be really good.
Thank you. That was feedback we heard last time. We did look at an alternative way of laying it out, trialed it with our operations board, and the feedback was that this remained the simpler way to do it, rather than switching between reading about actions and trying to understand what that's showing, and then moving on to a graph, and then back, and then onto a project. And it was felt that this was probably easier overall, but I appreciate that it's I don't think there's an ideal solution, unfortunately. We did consider trying to link things together, but the software that's used to publish these online doesn't really set up for that too well either. So it's something we'll keep considering whether there's a way to do it, but at present we haven't found a solution, unfortunately.
Any other comments? We are finished. On a final point, I too don't mind a standard deviation, I have to say. Thank everybody for their time and efforts as usual. Thank you for that. And obviously the meeting's now closed. Thank you.